One of my favorite things in the world to do is watch Friends. I know it's been off for years and years. It's not even around, but I still find myself binge watching old episodes. And I was thinking about this today and thinking, it's the predictability of the friends in the circle, right? You have Chandler with his quirkiness, Monica with her type A of just everything has to be so neat and tidy and organized. It's Phoebe's ability to make you laugh at her silly songs. Ross always comes in with those smart comments, and Joey and him and his food, like it is just so hilarious. And of course, Rachel, she just brings everybody together, and it's just such this beautiful, cohesive team of people. And it's why I wanted to come on and share with you today that I have an opportunity for you to find your friends in the content creation space. So if you are thinking about creating your first or your next digital course, I don't want you to miss this opportunity because Amy Porterfield just opened the doors for registration for her Course Confident Bootcamp. And I'm actually offering a special bonus for anyone that registers for the Course Confident Bootcamp through my special link. So I want you to go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register. That's crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And what you're going to find when you get there is I have this special bonus private podcast series. It's called Money Mindset for Creators. So I want you to go register for Amy's bootcamp, download the podcast, and immediately start listening to it, because what this training is set up to do is to help you get your mind right about monetizing your content, making money so that you can fuel your content creation dreams. So go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register for Course Confident. And I cannot wait for you to find your friends and find the people that will be there for you. Do you see what I did there? Yeah, nice little friends segue connection. Go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And I cannot wait to see you inside. Okay, let's get into today's episode. One of the things that I loved so much about 2021 was getting to meet podcasters and content creators in person. I got to go to Nashville, the podcast movement. I got to go to Arizona for She Podcast. And it was just so much fun to be around people that are creative, but also just to have conversations that don't happen as natural as they do online. Like, let's be honest. How many times have you gone to type something in a Facebook group and you're like, that's stupid. No one cares about that. And then you delete it and then you go on about your day and then it's never spoken of again because it was never spoken in the first place, right? Am I the only one? I hope that you're nodding along right now. You're like, yeah, I've done that a few times. Maybe even in our group. That's totally cool because I know what it's like to have a little bit of that disconnection whenever you're creating content. And you're like, man, I really just wish that either things were easier or I could connect with people that are just like me. Well, this is how I felt about today's guest. Yes, two, plural. There's going to be a three-way conversation today, and I'm talking to Shireen and Chrisella from Humble and Hustle Studios, who I met at She Podcast. We actually met in person. We didn't get to chat for too long because I was helping Buzzsprout work their booth, and they were working their own booth, but it was really cool to meet them, and they were like, hey, we should connect. We should collaborate. And I was like, absolutely. Y'all come on the podcast and let's nerd out on content marketing. And it was so much fun. Oh my gosh, so much fun. Y'all know I love nerding out about podcasting and marketing. And this was it was such a beautiful conversation. We had so much fun. So I hope that you enjoy my conversation with Chrisella and Shireen from the Humble and Hustle Studios. Let's get right to it. Welcome to the Profit Podcast, where we teach entrepreneurs how to start, launch, and market their podcast. I'm your host, Crystal Profit, and I'm so excited that you're here. Thanks for hanging out with me today, because if you've been trying to figure out the world of podcasting, think of this show as the time-saving shortcut you've been looking for. So let's get right to it, shall we? All right, Profit Podcast listeners, we have extra special episode today because I have two guests in the studio joining me. So welcome to the show, Chrisella and Shireen.
Thank you so much. Excited to be here.
Yes, this is so fun. So I actually had the lovely pleasure of meeting y'all at She Podcast in Arizona. And I loved hearing about what y'all are trying to do to help people make marketing suck less. Like, I love that it's part of your brand and what y'all do. So let's just start there. Like, what is it about marketing that gets y'all excited? And just tell us a little bit about what you do.
Well, one thing we do is we really work with podcasters to understand their messaging and their voice. And or when we work with our clients, and we really work with, and we think that's the base of everything that we do, is to start by understanding the messaging, understanding the voice that our clients have, because if we don't understand that, then we can't go out there and market for you.
Yeah, exactly. So I think when anybody, if you know a podcast that you're trying to start or a small business that you're trying to start, a lot of times I will go immediately to, okay, here's my logo and I have to be on all social media platforms all the time. And they don't really think through branding beyond, or even messaging beyond the logo or the visuals. And especially if you're doing it yourself, your voice ends up just being you. And so when you're trying to scale up your business, that makes it a lot harder as well, because you bring in another employee, or maybe if you have a podcast, you have a co-host, or you're interviewing people, or you are trying to push your marketing out to a marketing agency like Humble Hustle Studios. If your voice is just you, yourself, that can be hard for other people to try to match. And if you haven't thought it out, then every time somebody comes in and has, maybe a complaint or some valid criticism, it feels like they're attacking you because you are the voice. And that can make it really hard. So if you think through your branding beyond just the logo, and if you think of your voice for the brand being separate from yourself, we found that for a lot of our clients, that's actually very helpful to that kind of barrier there. And when you do start scaling up, whether that's bringing in another employee or a social media manager, or bringing in a marketing company, and you can hand that over to them and say, this is what the brand sounds like. This is the voice we use. This is who our brand is beyond yourself. It makes the whole process so much smoother.
Yeah. And this like, you're hitting on so many like real raw valid concerns. Like, I kind of winced a little bit when you said people take it as like attack, like a criticism of who they are as a person. Yes. Because I've felt this myself. Like, I have done this, and even though I've studied marketing and I love marketing and I love, like, it's still something that I think, unless we take an approach, like you were saying, like, as this is my business, this is my content. But how can someone, because I know there's people listening that are like, well, I am a personal brand, or I want to kind of separate myself from my business, but I don't really know how to do that. Is there any specific place where you would tell people to kind of evaluate, like, okay, well, let's look at this part of your business or this part of your marketing? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I would say to do, and one of the things that Chrisella and I walk a lot of our clients through, is figuring out your brand, like your brand archetype, or I think that's a good way to put it. So think about your voice separate from yourself. So does your brand voice, are you energetic? Think about some of those emotional adjectives to describe the brand, because we've had some clients where it's very young, very friendly, but they themselves are like a 50-year-old woman who, I mean, I still think that's young, but that's not necessarily the brand. That's not necessarily the audience that they were speaking to, right? Because they used a lot more slang. They used a lot more that kind of aggressive marketing that would be seen more in like 20 to 25-year-olds for their demographic. So that's one thing that you can look at, is look at your brand archetypes, look at the voice that you're wanting to use, look at your audience base or your client base, and see who they are relating to. And that's one way that you can separate it, even though it's you who it's doing the talking. If you have a personal brand and your brand matches up exactly with who you are, then I would say, think about those parts of your brand that maybe aren't quite you. Because I worked in customer service for a long time, and I can absolutely say my customer service voice is not me. It's no smile. It's the, yeah, absolutely, I can do that for you. My customer service voice is all the way up here. It's softer. Sometimes it's slower versus my regular voice, right? You can even think about it in that way. What are the parts of you as you're responding as your brand or your business that definitely isn't how you would respond as a normal person? That's one step that I would take to start separating yourself from that, so that when you do receive feedback, because any kind of criticism, that's just some feedback that you're getting. Maybe the feedback is coming from a person where you're like, you're not one of my normal audience members. You're not one of my normal customers. So I don't have to take this feedback as harshly as maybe somebody who has been a very loyal customer or follower for a long time and then comes at you with some stuff that maybe you do have to think about. And that's why doing an audit, for example, like a social media audit, or taking surveys of your clients, or your current clients, or your current listeners can also be very helpful. Because then you can say, who are your most loyal customers? Who are your most loyal listeners? And see what they're relating to. See what parts of your voice that they are finding the most connection with. Because not only will that help you establish who your brand is, that brand personality, that brand voice, separate from you, the person, but that can also help you find more people like your most loyal customers, your most loyal audience listeners.
Yeah, this is so good, because I'm imagining people that are listening right now are just getting started in their content creation journey, right? And they're listening to everything you're saying, and they're like, that sounds so amazing when I have an audience. So let's kind of flip this idea on its head right now for, the people that don't have it, and they're like, maybe it's just my friends and my family. They're listening to my content. They're watching my videos. They're following me on social, but they're not really my ideal people. So how can we accept this loving criticism? Because that's usually what it is. It usually comes from a good place where people are like, oh, well, we saw Joe Rogan do his podcast. I've actually had this conversation with my brother.
Oh,
he's called me and he's like, I love Joe Rogan and you should do this on your podcast. And I'm like, thank you, but your advice actually does not matter right now for me. So, but I appreciate you. So do y'all have any advice for people that are still trying to figure out their brand voice and who they want to talk to? Is there a way to get feedback on that?
Being a woman in business comes with its own unique set of challenges, but also so many opportunities. We get ahead by leaning in to what makes us different from business as usual. I'm Samantha Hartley, host of Profitable Joyful Consulting, inviting you to a special 6-episode series exploring the experience of being a woman in business. You want to hear from women consultants who've hit $1 million, who sell 6-figure engagements, or who've broken their own revenue ceilings? Yeah, those are my clients, and they'll be sharing too. Join me for 6 must-listen episodes that tackle key challenges for women consultants.
Follow Profitable Joyful Consulting on your favorite podcast app.
Yeah, I would say the most important thing is to remember who your ideal listener is in the first place. Really go back and create an avatar of who that listener is and figure out what they look, what their concerns are, what their day-to-day pains are, all these sorts of things. What is their daily life like? And once you figure that out, then you can really start talking to this ideal customer and this ideal listener. And as you talk to this ideal listener, you'll find that it starts attracting more people. Because if you're talking to the pain points of that ideal listener and really keeping your messaging customers focused, customer centered, then you're really going to be able to expand out beyond just the friends and family sort of thing. And you've got to remember that, if somebody isn't responding to that sort of messaging, then maybe they don't have those same pain points. So it's good to go back and audit your audience every now and then and make sure that you are on the right track with it. But also keeping in mind that, friends and family are well-meaning, but they aren't necessarily your ideal listener. They're not who you're trying to reach. They're not the people that you're trying to solve the pain points for. And so it's always good to keep in mind, just like who is it that you're actually trying to talk to, and who do you want your message to reach?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's great. And I want to.
Oh no,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, beyond building that avatar too, you also want to keep in mind your own values and mission and vision for your business or for your listeners, for your podcast. Because if your mission is very different from Joe Rogan's, for example, then they're coming and telling you should do it like Joe Rogan isn't going to be very helpful. But if your mission is very similar, then maybe it would be helpful, right? So even if you don't have this big following yet with tons of loyal customers, with tons of loyal listeners, keeping your own vision in mind and reminding yourself of why you created this business or this podcast in the first place can also be very helpful to continue down that journey. Because I mean, we all know we've all have podcasts or small businesses that we've tried to build ourselves. So we know how frustrating that can be when you're like, I know I'm doing something right here. I know I have something really good and really worthwhile. And so it can be frustrating when you haven't seen that growth yet. But relating it back to why you're doing it in the first place can give you that extra boost to continue on. And then going from there, building out your avatar and having a conversation with that ideal listener or that ideal client, like Chrisella said. Because if you're trying to just scream into the void and this trying to talk to everybody, that's not going to work, because not everybody has the same pain points that you are addressing. So when you bring it back down and start talking just to your ideal listener, I mean, there's billions of people on this planet. Somebody's going to fit into your ideal listener. Multiple people, tons of people are going to fit because you have pain points that you're addressing. And so once you have that avatar that you are talking to, people are going to see themselves within that avatar and they're going to go, yes, that's what I've been missing. This is what I need.
Yeah, this is so good. And I want to go back to, so Chrisella made a point that I really didn't want to brush over it, because it's so key to, I know what y'all do with your branding and trying to kind of massage just that right message, right? You'll kind of get there and then you're like, wait, that's not quite it. So when you go back to what you're saying about having an audit, you want to audit your own stuff, you want to look at either your social media or your website, is there a certain time frame that y'all have found, okay, we're going to give this 30 days and see how it resonates? Or is it a quarter of the year? Is there any kind of time frame that y'all have seen that works for someone to say, I'm going to test it, and then it's not working, let's do something else?
Mm-hmm. I would say that once you first start, give it 3 months before you start doing an audit, because it takes some time to gain traction. It takes some time to really get the word out there and that sort of thing. And it takes time for you to figure out what you're doing yourself. So give it about 3 months to get started. And then after that, I would do a yearly audit to make sure that you're on the right track. Just something to schedule in January at the first of the year, that you're going to do this audit of your audience, this audit of your social media and your website, and make sure that everything is still in line with your vision, your values, and your ideal customer.
Yeah, I was just going to say, before we hopped on, I was letting both of y'all know that I'm making a slight pivot in the content that I'm creating on my podcast and on my YouTube. And even though I'm not making this I'm not talking about basketball now or anything, that's just top of mind, because my kids are in basketball right now. So I'm okay, I'm definitely not diving in and going in a total 180 pivot into something else. But I did, that's exactly what you're saying. I did a audit. Here we are, we're recording this at the beginning of 2022, and I was looking back over 2021 about what I enjoy creating, but also what was actually performing. So can you talk a little bit about, when you're working with someone and you're working on your marketing, they're working on, how much you want the person or the business to show up in the marketing, but also make it fun, make it part of their personality, because I feel like I can have my personality shine in other aspects of my content, whereas I feel some of it's a little more either professional or, it's more like, oh, she's buttoned up and she looks like she's got it all together, which, fun fact, I do not at all, but
Do any of us really?
But can y'all speak to that?
Yeah, definitely. So I think, especially in this age of digital marketing, what a lot of people want to see and want to feel is a connection. And so having those moments where your audience or your customers get to see you, whether that's like a behind the scenes or just try to get to know you in any kind of way, is always going to help them connect with you more. And as people, we really crave connection. Now, I feel like we see that even more now because of the last 2 years, where we haven't been able to go out and get a lot of connection. Even before that, what people really wanted was connection. They wanted an experience more than just purchasing a product. Because quite frankly, when companies like Walmart and Amazon exist, just having a product is no longer good enough, right? So you could have the best product in the entire world on any market, and people, no matter who they are, yeah, but can I get something similar for cheaper from Amazon, where I don't have to pay for shipping? Like, that's just the unfortunate reality of having these behemoth kind of companies that exist. So what is going to help you stand out is going to be your branding and your messaging. If you have really solid branding and really solid messaging that connects with your ideal customer or your ideal listener, they are going to come to you, even though you might have a higher price point than going to somewhere like Amazon and Walmart. And so having those moments where you have a lot more connection, it is obviously much more personal, is going to be very helpful. But you just have to know what platforms you can do that on with your audience, right? So social media platforms like Instagram, especially Instagram stories or reels, or TikTok, that's going to be a huge one, especially for podcasters right now. TikTok, you can see a lot of growth there. Having those kind of moments on those platforms can be huge. But LinkedIn, no, not so much. LinkedIn is where it's going to be much more professional. So it's about knowing where your audience is for which kind of content they're looking for. So Instagram in like the feed, that's where they're looking for something that's going to be really beautiful, an image that attracts them, maybe a really nice like flat lay if you have products. And they're looking for a certain kind of curated image, versus in stories and reels, they're looking for that kind of personal connection. Reels, they're looking for something that's probably funny and short. TikTok, if you try to put up something super professional and a really high production value on TikTok, they're going to scroll right on by you. They do there. But if you have something on TikTok that looks much more like user-generated content, that's what's doing really well on TikTok. On YouTube, if you have something that is longer form content, that's what's doing really well on YouTube. If you're on Pinterest, having something that's very visual appealing on Pinterest and then links to your website, that's, it's just about really knowing where your audience is and what they're trying to get out of that particular platform. And it's the same thing if you are in a place where you can start running digital ads. You want to be very conscious of where you're running those ads, because an ad that does really well on LinkedIn is not going to do well at all on TikTok, and vice versa. So you can have these multiple dynamics, maybe is the right word, but you can have these multiple places on multiple social media platforms that showcase different parts of you and your brand, and still have it be very cohesive, as long as you are still relating it back to your mission, vision, values, and your messaging.
Yeah, this is great, because I'm imagining, because I know my listener is very somewhat in the aspect of who I was whenever I first started on my journey, and they just heard all the different platforms that you listed, and they're like, oh, I'm not there, I gotta be there. Oh, I'm not on there. Oh, so Shireen is saying, like, I gotta be on all these places, and I want to bring y'all back real fast, because everything that she mentioned, paid ads, TikTok, everything. So what are y'all's thoughts on that when people say they want to be everywhere?
Right. You do not. Yeah, you do not have to be everywhere. Absolutely not.
Yeah.
That was just examples. Yeah, you don't have to be
Yeah,
everywhere.
that is one of the
There
biggest
are people who are on. Go ahead.
It's one of the biggest mistakes we see new people do is try to be everywhere. And then they
Yes.
burn themselves out on marketing because they're trying to be everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And if you choose 2 or 3 platforms where you really know where your audience is, and this is why we say to audit your audience, because you got to find out where your audience is, where they spend time, where they enjoy spending their time. And you've got to figure out where you enjoy spending your time. If you hate Twitter, don't spend time on Twitter. Even if your audience is there, find another way to do it. So, think about where your audience is, what you enjoy doing, and then choose 2 or 3 platforms. You don't need to be everywhere.
No, exactly. And
This is so good.
Yeah.
And
I was gonna say it seems kind of
Go ahead.
counterintuitive for marketers to be like, no, don't be everywhere. It's pointless. But it kind of is. Because it stretches you too thin, especially as new businesses or new podcast or whatever you are. Part of the reason why these huge companies can be everywhere is because they've hired people. If you're doing it by yourself, there's no way. If it's only 1 or 2 of you, there's no way. These huge corporations have entire sections of their business that's just for marketing.
Entire
teams.
teams.
Exactly. And each team member isn't doing just one. There's out of their whole marketing section, there's in teams dedicated to single platforms even. So there's no reason to be everywhere. That's why Chrisella said, we do recommend doing an audit about 3 months in. Find where your audience actually is. Make sure that you like being there too, because if you hate it, it's going to come across. And there is going to be some overlap. So there's no reason to do things that you hate in marketing. So find where they are, find where you like to be, and then that's where you put in your effort and your time. And that's where you can start to actually grow more because you want to be there. Your audience is wanting to be there as well.
Yeah, and I'm curious, actually, out of both of y'all, is there one platform, as a consumer, not even so much as someone that works on social media, but is there one place that y'all like to hang out the most and you like to scroll and consume content?
I hang out on Twitter a lot. It's kind of my break from everything. I don't use Twitter for work because I find that trying to talk about marketing stuff on Twitter just doesn't go over really well. But I use it for other things like connecting with, I used to be a journalist, so I use it to connect with, those sorts of people and issues that I used to work with. So I find I spend a lot of time on Twitter.
What about you, Shireen?
I am not a big social media person. I know that's I do a lot of social media for work. I really love the marketing aspect of social media. I think it's fascinating. So I love digging into data points and looking at the behind the scenes part of social media. But as far as consuming social media, I find that once I start, I can do the mindless scroll. And I'm trying really hard to not do that anymore because I feel like it's killing my attention span. So, but the ones before I got into marketing, I should say that I really did enjoy. I did enjoy Instagram, but that's because I really took the time to curate my own feed, make sure it was only things that I really wanted to see, which was friends and family members, and then pictures of dogs. And so that's mostly what I have on my own Instagram. So when I do have to be there, that's where I tend to go. When TikTok came out, Chrisella and I were like, yeah, this is gonna be the next new one. And so we got onto TikTok, and I can see how that feed, especially for younger generations, can be very addictive because it is such fast moving content. And again, I was just like, oh, this would absolutely shorten my attention span even more so. And a lot of studies have come out and shown that that's true. And so I think it's a lot of fun. I think that the creators that are over there some of them are just brilliant, and it's so interesting to watch. It's really interesting to see the way that they've built out their algorithm in ways that can actually be really good for new businesses. The way that TikTok's built their algorithm is specifically for growth for new content creators or businesses, but it is very fast moving. So it just kind of depends on where I like to spend time. With TikTok, I feel like you could start it and then you look up and 3 hours has passed and you didn't realize. So I try not to be on there super often, and I try just to not do social media too often because I know that I'm going to have to do it during my work day. So yeah.
No, this is so good. And I wanted everybody to hear this from y'all too, because I think that what ends up happening is when people hear that they need to be on social media, they kind of get locked into this idea that, oh, if I'm going to be on social, then I need to be spending hours like engaging in, you know, doing all these things that maybe it's the idea of the influencer, you know, because I didn't grow up. I didn't have social media. Like all of this was new to me in my early 20s is like really when it started happening. And so when I look at how people are starting businesses today, it's almost like this, well, you got to be on social and you got to be connected all the time. And back to what you were saying earlier, Chrisella, about like the idea of burning out. It's like, it's a real thing. Like when people think I got to be everywhere all at once, and then they're going to burn themselves out. So I appreciate y'all sharing the real side of, you know, yes, it's amazing to use social media, but also there's a boundary. There's a boundary to be had.
And
yes, boundaries with social media are so important. If you don't set those boundaries, you will burn yourself out. And so it's really important to decide up front what your boundaries are going to be, like what your time boundaries, your, your platform boundaries, all these sorts of things are going to be up front. And that will actually help you create like a much more enjoyable experience with your marketing.
Exactly. And it's important to think of those things at the beginning too, because a lot of times you'll be like, oh, it's so much fun and I just want to know people and have them get to know me. And then 2 years down the line, you're like, okay, I don't really want them to know me this well though. So it is something to think about ahead of time, because and this is part of marketing in general too, especially with content creators, is if you start with sharing 100% of yourself, which so many of us do truly, because that's what the platforms are designed to make you want to do. If you start with sharing 100% of yourself and then you're like, I don't really like doing this very much anymore, and you back off, all the people who really loved that you shared 100% of yourself will be very upset when you stop. So that's just something to keep in mind. If you're doing it from a business point of view, where you're not necessarily the face of your company or the face of your podcast, that can help with those boundaries. So it's one of the things that Chrisella and I have talked to some of our clients about before is, do you want to be the face of this? Because you also don't have to. There are people who have podcasts that even though they are the voice that people are hearing, even though they are, quite frankly, they are the podcast, what's going out on social is the brand of the podcast. And it's not necessarily associated with their face. It's the brand itself. And so that's one way that you can put up those boundaries and you can put up barriers. Because I know a lot of people who they're like, I have a lot to say and I know a lot about this topic and I would love to have a platform that I can share about this particular thing with, but I don't want people really knowing who I am. I really don't want to be responsible for sharing so much of myself out there. And then I just remind them that's what branding is for. You don't have to have your face out there. You don't have to share anything. You could have a made up name. Nobody knows. That's totally fine. It's about what you want and what you're comfortable with. And, you know, there's musicians that do that. Like Sia, the musician Sia, for years, one of the reasons she wore those wigs that hid the top half of her face is because she didn't want to showcase that part of herself for a very long time. And now people know who she is, but where she's most recognizable is wearing either wigs or hats or whatever it is that cover her face, because that is the persona that she created when she became famous after that. And so now it's just one of those things where if you take the time now to think about it and truly think about what your own values are and what you want to share with the world, it'll just make it that much easier to continue doing that. Now you can start at 50 and then decide that 70 is actually where you want to go. You can always ramp it back up. It's really hard to pull it back in, and especially once your listeners or your clients or customers have really started to make those, what they feel like are really deep parasocial connections with you. People can get really upset when you take that away from them. So,
well, I feel like you just gave the biggest gift to all the introverts in my audience. They're like, oh my gosh, like this just made me like feel so much, because this is why I love bringing on people that are obsessed with marketing as I am, but have a totally different perspective. Because the way that I've kind of set up my business and my brand is I knew from a long time ago that I wanted, like my website, for instance, is crystalprofit.com. And I wanted to do that because I thought, well, what if I decided to change things in the future? I didn't want to have to do a big rebrand and all these things. So I myself am my personal brand, but I'm also extroverted and I'm totally fine with that. I'm like, hey, this is me. I'm here. This is what you see is what you get. But there's a lot of people in our audience who are just like, I never thought about just being an alias, being anonymous, or just being the voice behind a brand. So this was such great information. I so appreciate you sharing that. Do y'all have any other kind of, go ahead, Chrisella.
I was just going to say, we are both introverts, Shireen and I, so we completely understand that desire to kind of hide behind the brand sort of thing. Like, I think we both do that a lot.
Yeah, this is great. And I think it's...
Oh, sorry. No, I was going to just say that on our website for the first, I think, maybe year and a half after we rebranded our website, the pictures that we had up for our own names was actually pictures of our dogs instead of our own pictures.
Rather than our own pictures. Yeah.
Well, this is actually something I wanted to talk about. I looked at y'all's website before, I was like doing my own little due diligence and my research because I wanted to make sure that I was prepared for our conversation. And I love that you brought up your dogs because they are still there. They are the honorary team members.
Yes.
And I wanted to just point out, like, this is such a great way to connect who you are as people to your brand without it being like you're airing out your dirty laundry for the whole world to see. So
yes.
I think that this is a great topic that we should kind of go a little bit deeper in. So do you have any advice other than, like kind of start with what you're comfortable with, but you can always pull it back as it's a little bit harder to do that. But do you have any advice for someone that's listening and they're like, oh, this is really the route that I want to go, but I need to create podcast artwork. I need to do my website. And like, I thought like maybe they've been following people that are influencers for so long. Do y'all have another great example of someone that does this really well? Maybe it's one of your own clients or any other kind of examples?
That's a great question. Let me think about that for a minute.
Yeah.
So, I would say as far as like podcasts go, people who do it really, really well, that I'm like off the top of my head, some of my favorite podcasts lately. Glennon Doyle started a podcast called We Can Do Hard Things. And I think they do a really great job because at first it started out as being just Glennon herself and then she hated it. They didn't even put out any of those episodes. And then it was Glennon and her sister and Amanda. And then it's also Glennon, her sister Amanda, and now her wife Abby Wambach. And so it's like, it's kind of grown through the stages of where they want to be as a podcast. And now it's in 3 of them. And they also do interviews with other people who they want to shine a light on through the podcast. So you can always grow in whatever way feels most comfortable for you. So it could also one of these days go back down, but they have established the brand of their podcast and so they have a personality behind the podcast itself. They have a voice for the podcast itself. That even if, even though most people are there for Glennon, I honestly believe the podcast voice and personality is strong enough that if Glennon wasn't even there for an episode or 2, if it was just Amanda, her sister, or Abby, her wife, really doing the podcast, I don't think that it would suffer very much. I think that people would be like, oh, well, where's Glennon? But I don't think that it would be a huge disadvantage if she's like, oh, I need a couple weeks off, but I don't want the podcast to stop. So I think that's probably a really good example of people who took the time to think through what they wanted to do and what they wanted out of the podcast. And other people, I'm trying to think of like other people who do this really well with like really strong messaging in particular beyond podcasting.
While she's thinking of that, I would just say that if you're just starting out and trying to figure out all these little things, I would say more important than the podcast logo and the podcast, the cover art and all that sort of stuff really is going to be your messaging. It's going to be your values. It's going to be your vision for the podcast. If you can start with those things and figure out what you want out of the podcast, who you want to talk to, who your ideal listener is going to be, and figuring out that core of your messaging there, that's going to be the most important part. And then once you have that figured out, then you can figure out the style of it. We have a pyramid that we talk about that starts with the substance of the substance is at the bottom of the pyramid, where you have like your messaging, your vision, your values. And then once you get to the top, then comes your website, your logo on all these visual assets. So you can't have the top of the pyramid there without that bottom substance. And so if you start by thinking really about the substance that you want out of your podcast, the rest of it will come. Whether that's by, going to somebody on Fiverr or just you designing it yourself through Canva, with free tools like that. It will come, but you have to know what the substance is of the podcast first, or else you'll just be designing without direction.
Ooh, I like that. Designing without direction. That's a tweetable. That's a tweetable for you to share on Twitter, Chrisella.
There you go.
I love it. Yeah, that's a great point that Chrisella brings up is when we talk to any of our clients about their branding, we really talk about that substance part of our brand pyramid and the parts that you really want to have figured out, because the visuals, a lot of people go to the visuals because it seems less daunting. I feel like, where you're like, okay, I can help create a logo, or I know a graphic designer, I have like a little bit of a budget that I can put that way. And that seems like the easier part of it. And for a lot of people it can be. I am definitely not a graphic designer. So that's the part that actually scares me the most, is doing that section of it. So I'm kind of the opposite of a lot of people. But the substance part of it is going to be what actually pushes you through the harder times. That's what can help you connect better with your audience or your listeners, whether it's, you're starting your podcast, or you are a content creator, or you are starting your small business. Having that substance part really fleshed out is going to be the most important, because we all know like visuals can change. People do rebranding of their logos quite often. You can change up your website quite often, especially if you've done it yourself. You can, a little bit about how the back end works. But changing your mission, vision, values is something that doesn't happen very often. Companies can still definitely do it. Or small businesses, podcasters. I have seen some podcasts switch from like an interview to suddenly a true crime podcast, right? Like people have made that switch before. It's not impossible, but it is definitely more difficult. And so really nailing down that substance part of it, and getting your messaging correct for yourself and also your listeners, if you already have them, is going to be really help with the longevity of whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. Whereas changing a visual aspect, you can do that fairly quickly. All you really need to do is let your audience know that it's happening. So it can be, hey, we're going to do a rebrand on these logos. Which ones do you like the best? That's a good way of even bringing your loyal people along that journey with you. It's a lot harder to be like, actually, we're going to do true crime now. Stick around. So it's, so it's really, some people might, but it's a harder transition. So getting that base figured out first, is definitely going to be the most helpful.
Well, that is something that we preach around here all the time is, you got to know your value and what you're offering to your audience first. And really everything, in my opinion, always starts with your customers and the people you're trying to serve. And, how can you add value to what they're trying to accomplish, whatever their purpose is? Like one of the things, like speaking of, I've made like a micro rebrand in the last 6 months where it was something that was basically a principle of my business, but I wasn't saying it out loud. It's like I wasn't sharing it with other people, and therefore it's not something I was known for. But something I've been trying to say a lot more is I help people that help people. So I help a lot of coaches and like industry leaders, experts, people that are trying to build authority in certain spaces. And so with that being said, you triggered something for me too. I would love to ask both of you, is there something that, as the evolution of marketing, right? With social media, like everything is just like constantly changing and evolving, my brain included. Is there any one thing that stands out that y'all are really excited to either implement in your own business or with your customers? Is there anything that you're like, all right, 2022, like this is the year, I'm ready to do this? Does anything stand out in your mind?
Oh, that's funny that you ask that, because we talked about this and we're like, okay, 2022 is the year where we really learn TikTok and really dive into TikTok. So that's what's on our plate for us. We're running TikTok ads for a couple of clients now to just kind of learn that system and experiment with it a little bit. And because we run a lot of ads for clients on Facebook and Instagram, but now we're seeing, more people are wanting to check out TikTok ads. So we're really experimenting with that now. And along with that, just experimenting more with the video part of it as well, because there's so much you can do on TikTok, and there's just such a broad audience on there, and it's such a wide array of interests that it's really such an interesting platform with the algorithm and an interesting algorithm. So TikTok is kind of our thing to experiment with this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would also say for like anybody who is just starting, or for clients and they're like, where should we go with digital marketing right now in this year? And Chrisella really hit it. It's with TikTok for us, but I would just say anything that you haven't tried yet, like don't be afraid to try something. You never know what is going to connect, and giving yourself the opportunity to be open and to try new things, because it's not always going to work, right? Like that's marketing in general. We talk about like the science and art of marketing a lot at Humble and Hustle Studios. It is kind of an art form. You do have certain creative aspects that go along with marketing, but part of it is also a science. And so it's, you try something, you have a hypothesis of how you think it's going to work, because you don't want to just be flinging mud on walls or into a fan there. And so you try something out, you have a hypothesis on how it's going to work, and you let it run for, we like to let campaigns run for about 3 months if possible, but you can do shorter campaigns than that depending on like the size of your audience. But you let it run, and then you look at the data and see what it's telling you. So you can't just let things run and be like, I'm pretty sure it worked, let's keep it going. You don't want to do that either. So you have to look at the data and see what it's telling you, because you would actually be really surprised at some of that feedback from the data. So I've had some clients where I'm like, this is going to hit so hard, it's going to be so good. And then it completely flopped. And I was like, oh, but it was so good because I liked it so much. But I maybe didn't fit within that client's ideal listener or ideal customer, even though what we created for them, I loved. And we saw that in the data, versus there are some where we made something and I'm like, I personally cannot stand that. That's like, I hate it. How we created it was really great. It was really creative, but oh man, I did not like it at all. And it did so well. And I was like, oh, now I have to create this every time. But that's marketing, right? It's very humbling. You just have to go with what the data is telling you. And sometimes what's wrong was the platform, right? So you take that exact same campaign that did terribly on, on Facebook, and we put it on Google and it does great. Or you think that went really, really poorly on Google and you put it on Facebook and that's where it did great. So you never really know until you've tried it. And so I would tell people who are starting out, like, don't be afraid to try new things. And if it comes back and it didn't do well, that's just more information. Because if the data is showing that you have tons and tons of engagement, but no conversions, that means that you are getting in front of the right people, but maybe your message, right? Sometimes it can be as simple as buy the product, but your messaging doesn't say anywhere in there that you want you to buy the product. So they didn't. or sometimes you have really low engagement, huge conversions. So that's telling you something too. It's really about looking back at that data and saying, okay, there's a discrepancy here. We have lots of engagement, but nobody, like, they got on the landing page and it loaded, but nobody actually purchased anything. So it's like, okay, so the ad that we ran or the organic messaging that we ran on social got people over to our website, but once they saw the website, it didn't connect. Maybe the messaging on the website is wrong. Or we saw tons of likes on this post because the picture was really beautiful, but they didn't read the caption. So maybe what we need to do is use that same image, but put the text like on the image itself so that people stop at the image, but actually see the text too, rather than having to open the caption. There's all these different ways to play around with your creative or with your marketing if you look at the data.
Yeah, this is so helpful. And I know that there are some people, like, their head is spinning at some of the things that because they're just like, oh my gosh, this all sounds overwhelming. But hey guys, this is what Chrisella and Shireen do for other people. So don't worry, we're going to tell you how you can actually work with them. You can say, hey, I want to hire them because what she's saying feels a little over my head, but I'm jiving with it. And that's exactly, I mean, maybe there's a lot of people listening right now that said, you know what, 2022 is the year that I decided I want to invest in my brand. I want to invest in growing or scaling my audience or my platform, whatever that looks like for you. Don't worry, we're going to tell you exactly how you can work with the Humble and Hustle Studios, because I think that we are doing is fantastic, and I could nerd out on marketing with you all day because it's so much. Like, I'm over here to like go on, keep talking. But we do need to wrap up the episode because I want to ask y'all. I have some fun rapid fire questions. So are you up for those?
Let's do it.
Okay, so how we'll do this is because there's just 3 questions, but I'm gonna start. I'll ask the question, and then we'll have Chrisella and then Shireen answer. Okay.
Okay.
So the first one is, what piece of advice would you give to a brand new podcaster?
Just start. Don't overthink it. Don't make it too complicated. Just start.
That would be my answer too, is just start. It doesn't have to be hard. I know people who started their podcast by recording into their phone.
Mic drop. I love that answer so much because it is as simple as that. Okay. My next question is a 2-part question. And Shireen, you're going to have a second to think about it, but Chrisella's going to say, I don't want to answer first. Okay. The first one is, what is the dream podcast you would love to be on? And who is your dream podcast guest that you would love to interview?
Oh my gosh, that's hard. For the dream podcast guest that I'd love to have, I'd love to talk to Seth Godin. He's kind of like a marketing guru out in the world, and he's got these brilliant ideas on branding and all that sort of stuff. I'd love to pick his brain about branding more. For being on a podcast, oh my gosh, I don't even know, because there's so many podcasts out there that it's so hard to choose just one. I'm going to have to say I don't know for that one.
That is such a hard question. I guess it depends, because if it was going to be just for fun, just like an absolute just for fun to be on it podcast, oh gosh. Well, I would love to be on the We Can Do Hard Things podcast, but that's just because I absolutely love Glenn and Doyle. So I would have nothing to say. I would just like to see their faces. So that would just, but, so that would be fun. Or, yeah, probably that one. As far as a dream guest goes, I would love to talk to, Lovey. I don't know if either of you follow Lovey. She is incredible, and she built a business herself, kind of around herself and her own brand. And I think she would be absolutely fascinating a fascinating conversation just to talk to her, and how she not only built that and established that for herself, but how she continues to try to do that for other businesses as well.
So good. I'm going to link to because she was recently on Glennon's podcast, and I haven't listened to that episode yet. And I'm like, oh yeah, I haven't listened. I have that one bookmarked. I'm like, I have to listen, and I have her book. Like, I'm like, I want to finish reading her book, Professional Troublemaker. Like, yes, very, very good company, very good ones. Yes. We'll link to all those in the show notes. Perfect. Okay. My last question for both of y'all is, do you consider yourself a perfectionist?
Oh, this is something I have worked very hard on, to not be a perfectionist, because I used to be like very perfectionist to the point where it was like impeding my daily activity sort of thing. So I actually have worked very hard to be less of a perfectionist. And if you end up seeing the video clip, you'll see behind me, my office is a mess now and I didn't get it perfectly cleaned up for this because I ran out of time too. But it's one of those things that I've kind of been trying to release that pressure on myself and not be a perfectionist anymore.
I am absolutely a perfectionist, and I have also been trying to work on it. I like to call it formerly gifted child syndrome. So it is hard, and I would say that it serves you well up until a point. It would serve me a lot better if there were more than 24 hours in a day. And I think a lot of times what happens when people are perfectionists is that they stop doing anything because they're so terrified of not being able to get it perfect. So I have stopped that in myself, which is great. Yeah. And then after that step is the telling yourself it's okay that it's not perfect, which is true. I don't think anybody really expects perfection out of others like they do of themselves. So for anybody listening who is just thinking about starting their podcast or is just thinking about starting their new business or things like that, I can tell you it does not need to be perfect. It needs to be what you have promised it would be. So don't promise perfection, and nobody will accept it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's so good. That was like an extra little piece of advice for podcasters. That was such a great way to end this conversation. This was so awesome. I appreciate both of you being here today. And for anybody that's listening and they're like, okay, these ladies are my cup of tea, I definitely want to check them out. What should they do to learn more about working with you, or where can they get connected with you and what you do?
I'd say the best place to check out would be our website. It's humblehustle.studio. And come check us out there. We've got a little form where you can schedule a call on every page with us and come chat with us there. If you want to work with us some more, or you just want to chat about like your marketing needs and what let's see if we're a good fit, schedule a call with us. We'd love to chat. You can find those links on our website. And we do have, we're offering a 1-hour brand messaging consult right now. So, contact us, schedule a call with us to see if that's the right fit for you.
Awesome. And y'all have to check out their dogs on the website.
Yes, come check out our dogs.
The fur babies.
They're working just for that.
Well, thank you both so much for being here today.
Thank you for having us today.
Yes,
this has been so much fun.
Y'all, that was so fun. So fun. Like I said, I love nerding out about all things podcasting, all things marketing, just content creation. I love it so stinking much. And I love that Chrisella and Shireen, like, this is one of the things, and I know we kind of talked about this in the interview, but this is why I like different people's perspectives. And what I think is so cool about podcasting is we all kind of do the same thing, right? I mean, they're in the business of marketing and content creation. They could tell you all the things that I tell you on this podcast, but they have a different perspective. They have a different way of looking at things that I hope that you really can see the value in having guests on your show and collaborating with other people in your industry, because it's magic, y'all. It's magic. It's so awesome. So go check out Chrisella and Shireen. I'm going to link to them in the show notes. So go to crystalprofit.com/episode 333 for all the ways that you can connect with them. But that's all I have for you today. So as always, remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. Hey, Profit Podcast listeners. Thanks for sticking around to a little bit after the episode to hear this special message because I want to hear from you. We are starting a new segment called Fan Mail Shoutouts, and I want to hear from you and I want to hear your questions. What do you want to know? What questions have you been dying to ask me? So here's how to make this happen. Go to the app where you're listening to this podcast right now. Go there. I'll wait a second. Okay. Now, once you're there, you're going to see a hyperlink at the top of the episode description that says, send Crystal a text message. And that's all I want you to do. Send me a text. It could be casual, informal. It could be totally anonymous. Or if you want, you can include your name and the name of your podcast or content wherever you are creating, and I will give you a special shout out in an upcoming episode. So again, go to the show notes for where you're listening to this episode right now, and it will say, send Crystal a text message. And I cannot wait to hear from you and give you a shout out in an upcoming segment of Fan Mail Shoutouts.